Hey everybody, I'm Reverend Miriam Mick. I serve as elder in the South Carolina Conference and I'm currently serving the Inman Charge in Inman, South Carolina. I'm also a certified spiritual director, but most important for this particular content are the 23 years I spent, some of that as a deacon working in hospice, and some of that time as a bereavement specialist. What would happen during those times when there would be a series of losses? What I noticed was that I'd be fine for like 6, 7, 8, even 9, and maybe the 10th loss of the hospice patients that I had been working with. About the 10th loss would hurt me deeply. And it seems like that one loss would bring up all of the grief that I had been carrying for all of those other losses. Would come up, one loss would trigger a grief for all the losses. One of the things we can be aware of is not just what's happening from the outside in our work, particularly during the pandemic when there might have been loss after loss, losses of those folks that, unlike hospice, people we've known when they were healthy and known over the years and who have become close to us. So if we are aware of what we're already bringing to the table in terms of how grief is going to affect us, then we are more able to manage and to know what is coming. What do I mean by that? If you will take a moment and even pause the video if you need to and think about the first loss you experienced in this lifetime that you remember. Could have been a grandparent, could have been another child, a classmate, it could have been whatever that loss was. I want you to remember that and to consider the age of the person, what was the primary cause of the death, what maybe an illness, maybe an accidental death, sudden loss versus a loss that was people were expecting, uh, and how, if you were not in control, as I wasn't when my first loss happened, how did the people around you allow you to participate? Were you allowed to go to the funeral? Did they talk about the loss around you? Or did they separate you out and wait till you were out of the room to talk about that loss? If you know that particular, what molded you to your first death and loss and to the response that was modeled for you around that loss, that's going to inform how we manage and how we respond to loss the rest of our lives. Unless we have a situation like I did where I was called to hospice work and I had to work through all of those things so I could be present to those that were experiencing loss of families and walking with them through that grief in a different way than I was led to, which was out of sight, out of mind. We don't talk about it. There are many in the workshops that I've done for pastors. I noticed many who really didn't experience a loss close to them until they were adults. And that may be your experience too. But how we are allowed to participate in the loss uh, informs and what particular loss it was. So, using my own life as an example, my first loss was um, I had my father's good friend who also had made me his girlfriend in a good way, and allowed me to go fishing with him and that kind of thing. He died suddenly in a car accident. And when I asked my father about it, I couldn't tell what he was saying. But what happened was that in asking him about it over again, I was yelled at and I was asked to leave the room. There was my first modeling. You don't talk about the person who's died. You don't keep asking questions. Shortly after that, a young girl died in my class, uh, one of my classmates. And again, what I was told is if you're sad, you might want to go to your room and lie down, um, basically isolate myself. And I was like, oh, I was not a child who liked to be alone. So the message to me was if you're going to grieve, you're not going to be able to be around people. So that would shut my grief off. My mother died when I was 20, and of pancreatic cancer. Again, my father modeled out of sight, out of mind. First of all, she wasn't going to die, and then when she did die, he began to date immediately. Death was really poorly handled in my family. So that is the experience that I had, which, glory be to God, was healed in that hospice work. And now I can talk about it. In fact, I talk a lot about death with those who are dying and with the families, and as we all have become comfortable doing if we've done this work for very long, the work of pastoring. What I will tell you is that if you notice, what I noticed is if there was a woman who was around 50 who was dying of cancer, that triggered for me my own grief because it was so close to the association with the grief that I had experienced. If in your life you have a particular person that just the loss of that person, and I'm not talking about your immediate family, I'm talking about those we serve, um, it just may have, you might want to ask yourself, what is it about this loss that reminds me of something in my own childhood, or reminds me something about how death was modeled for me as I grew up. We're only just touching base with our first modeling of death in our lives. These videos are to be short, and so we'll go from here, just noticing how the loss in our own lives have informed and continue to um, touch our own grief from our lives, so that we can, if we're aware of that, we can manage and even predict when someone's loss is going to be difficult for us. We'll talk some more. God bless.